into how to get the best dimensional look out of shooting a vehicle with various formats of camera. I note that that seems to be a challenge for folks to know how to set up the shot and get the best from their system to get the best dimension rendered in an image. So I popped out for 10 minutes yesterday afternoon to a favorite image restoration, vehicle restoration location where they've got some nice old jalopies hanging about in various states of disrepair, so that I could actually shoot a real world example and walk you through it. So this was taken using the GFX 50R and the 45mm 2.8. Let's pull this image up so we can take a look at it. I'm gonna walk you through how I would look at setting up a shot like this. The first and most obvious thing for me is I'm shooting wide open with a GF45 at f2.8. I'm looking to get depth of field roll-off over the vehicle to give an idea of its shape and dimension and depth. So I'm going to be very specific about how I set up the look of the shot, the composition, the focus point, and I'll walk you through that. I'm going to pick a day where the lighting is subtle, so not full sunlight. I want to get all the tonal graduations in the image. It's kind of like taking a portrait of a person. You're not going to do it in full sun. You're going to do it in the shade, or you're going to pick a day like this where it's overcast. I get the best tonal grads in my image. My vehicle here, I'm going to shoot it low down. Vehicles look better shot from the waist level or below. That's important as well if I'm trying to represent the vehicle against an out of focus background, because if I'm looking down on the vehicle, all I'm really doing is looking at the edges of the vehicle as they are contrasted with the ground, because I'm looking down on it, and the ground isn't really that far away. By getting down low as I have here, I'm looking at the vehicle against this out of focus backdrop. And I want the vehicle to be in the fairly near field, so the subject distance is short, but I want the background distance to be much longer, because I'm interested in this going out of focus and seeing the contrast between this sharp vehicle and the out of focus background. I'm going to deliberately pick an angle where I've got a nice view of the front of the vehicle in this case, but I can see the length of the vehicle going off, so I get a nice perspective from my field of view. I'm going to lock my camera down on the tripod, make sure it's all level and everything, and then shooting wide open, I'm going to focus on this headlight at the front. It's kind of like taking a portrait and focusing on the eyes. I'm not going to focus on the middle of the vehicle, and there's a very specific reason for that. I want to focus on the nearest point. In this case, I'm going to pick this headlight as being on the fender nearest to me, because I'm not really interested in seeing the depth of field fall off in front of the point of focus. I'm interested in seeing depth of field roll off behind the point of focus. So I'm not focusing somewhere else on the vehicle. I'm focusing right here, and then everything on the main body of the vehicle is depth of field roll off away from this point of focus behind it. And that's a key piece. Other than that, you can see I've got my nice low stance. I've got my background nicely out of focus. I focused on this point. I'm good to go. So I'm going to import this image into Photoshop. I'll just point out that I've modified the sharpening away from the default that Photoshop put it at, so that we're getting less artificial detail. So I got my image. I can already see, looking at it here in Photoshop, and even just at this screen resolution, it's got a nice dimensional feel to it. The sharp grille and front end of the vehicle, um, in contrast with the rest of the vehicle as it goes out of focus past the windshield back to the rear fender. And particularly looking at this line of the hood against the out of focus background, and this line of the fender against the out of focus background, plus the fact that I've got space around the vehicle and some negative space here in the bottom right hand corner for the vehicle to move into. This is always important from a vehicle perspective so it doesn't look too cramped. And the vehicle's kind of across the diagonal in the image to get the best out of the aspect ratio that I have. So I'm happy with this. This image as a whole gets me to a starting point where I actually have an image that's got some dimensional qualities to it. If I'm going to do any sort of a comparison between, for example, different camera systems, I need an image that has some dimensional quality to it to start with. Otherwise, all I'm doing is comparing flat images between different camera systems. And all that's going to prove is that I can take flat-looking images with multiple different camera systems, which is somewhat of a pointless exercise. But here, I think, because of the way I've done my composition and my focus point, I've already got a very dimensional-looking image from my GFX, which I'd be happy with. So that's good. Let's go ahead now and swap over the memory cards. Kick this one out. Pop in a new one. And what I did was I swapped out my GFX for the other system that I typically carry. So this is an XT3, or XT2 actually, in this case, XT2 I took with me today with the excellent 23mm f1.4 lens from Fuji. I've used this lens for many years now to shoot vehicles in the same way. So what I did in this case was swap the camera out onto the tripod so that it's in the same shooting location. And as with the previous GFX image, I put the focus point on this headlight right here, and I opened up the lens wide open. So I've got the same approximate field of view with an equivalent focal length lens. You can see it looks very similar. I'm seeing that it actually looks a little bit on the light side. Brightness wise, I didn't match my exposures very well, but I could just quickly maybe bring in a little bit of exposure comp. Alright, that looks about right. So here's my XT2 image. I won't discuss the comp because it's exactly the same. I'll bring that into Photoshop as well. So now I've got the two images of the vehicle. Let's fill screen. Clearly I've got different aspect ratio between the two systems, but that's not important for what I'm looking at here. So I think as a stare and compare, the first thing you'd say is that the two images look very similar. That's exactly what you'd expect. You've used an equivalent focal length lens between the two systems. You've put the two cameras on the same tripod. Clearly I could have gone to better lengths maybe to match the height of the cameras and where the axis of the lens is. But it was a quick and dirty 10-minute test, so I'm happy that I've got the two images with the same field of view. I think if you do a stare and compare, which is the typical way that these images are presented to people to look at, most people are going to do a stare and compare between two images like this and go, well, they look pretty much the same. Well, yeah, they're the same field of view of the same object taken pretty much at the same time. They're going to look very similar. But what I'm interested in looking at when I'm looking at how dimensional I can get an image is this roll-off of depth of field between the sharp object in the foreground and the out of focus background. And because of the way I position my AF point, I'm looking at the depth of field roll-off behind the focus point over this hood and over this fender to get to the out of focus background here. And that's my area of interest, and that's what's going to be a differentiator between using maybe a GFX system and in this case the XT2. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to take this image and overlay it over the XT2 image. I'll scale it because if you look at the image size from the XT2, it's a 6000 by 4000 image. I'll just to get it in the same ballpark, I will scale this image to 6000 wide, and I'll copy that, and then I'll paste the image over the top of my XT2 image, and I'll call that GFX, and I'll call that XT2, so we know which is which. What I'm going to do is actually just drop the opacity on the top layer a minute so that I can scale that image and match it more exactly to what I'm looking at. So I'm going to start to scale the image and move it into location. Because I've got the opacity set, I can kind of see how one overlays over the other. And I'm going to just keep scaling this down until I get the headlights matched. That's kind of where I'm looking right now as a good focus point to match up. There we go. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. So let's set that. Get my opacity back up. And now with the two images, the GFX image overlaid on the XT2, I can start to switch between the layers in the image, and I can actually start to see more of a difference in the two shots. I notice there's a white balance difference. That's not particularly critical at this point. Interested to see how the height of the axis of the lens on the two cameras varies the field of view. Again, not critical for what I'm looking at here, because what I'm really interested in from an image that has depth and dimension to it are things like how this fender and this headlight are going to render against the out of focus background, as I talked about. So let's go take a look at that. Here's my GFX with my, I can see I got nice detail here on the headlight and the fender. And when I switch between the two, I immediately start to see the difference between the two systems. Let me center that for you. Here's my GFX. Here's my XT2. Looks a lot flatter. Looks a lot more dimensional. Flatter, more dimensional. Flatter, more dimensional. It's pretty clear.